An introduction to IPDA debate. The format of debate we're going to be doing this semester is IPDA debate, and we've briefly talked a little bit about it. You've watched the space exploration debate, which is an IPDA format. We introduced academic debating 2 weeks ago, and last week Professor Staler introduced how we're going to go about judging IPDA debates. And so this week I wanted to introduce to you how an IPDA debate functions. What's the structure? Now, it starts with the resolution, as we mentioned before. The resolution is the topic for the round. It's what we're going to discuss. It sort of answers the what question of the critical thinking model. The affirmative team should support the resolution. So when you get assigned to do your first debates, you're either going to be randomly assigned to the affirmative side or to the negative side. The affirmative team should support the resolution. You're going to be saying yes, you're the pro side. The negative team will oppose the resolution. You'll be the con side or the no side. IPDA debate has 5 speeches alternating between affirmative and negative. It starts with a first affirmative speech where you'll have up to 4 minutes to present your case. The first negative speech is also 4 minutes where you'll both present your negative case as well as refute the affirmative case. It then swings back to the affirmative side, who will have 2 minutes to both refute the negative case that was just introduced, as well as respond and rebuild to the affirmative case. Then the second negative has 2 minutes to respond to what the affirmative just said about their negative case, as well as to once again attack the affirmative case, before we finish with a third affirmative speech, 2 minutes long, where you once again refute the negative case and rebuild your affirmative case. In addition, there are periods of cross-examination, 1 minute. We're not 100% sure if we're going to do these this semester, but we just wanted to introduce them to you. And so after the first affirmative speech, the negative debater gets 1 minute to ask questions of the affirmative debater. And after the first negative speech, the affirmative debater gets 1 minute to ask the negative debater questions. Now we're going to talk about all these in detail now, but I just wanted to give you a brief overview of what the entire debate round looks like. So the first affirmative speech, again, you have 4 minutes to present. Your responsibility is to present the affirmative case. This is the only really scripted speech in the debate. Here's where you can use your affirmative case assignment that you've already prepared, and you're basically just going to read it. Your jobs, 5 steps, is to first introduce your speech. Just like in speech 1A, you always want to start off every presentation with a quick introduction. Think of it like an attention getter. You might pose a question, make a joke, introduce a statistic. You're just getting us tuned into you as a speaker. Next, you're going to present the resolutional analysis, where you're going to help clarify what the words in the resolution mean. Now, this is really important for that what question of the critical thinking model, because if you and I are debating and we have a different understanding of key words in the resolution, it's not going to be a very productive debate. We'll be talking about different things. And sometimes in beginning debates, I think I mentioned this earlier in the semester, it kind of looks like 2 ships are passing in the night, right? We're talking about the same thing, but we're not actually clashing with each other. We're not disagreeing with each other because we have different understandings of key words, and so we're talking about different things. So under resolution analysis, you want to clarify what the words in the resolution mean and make sure we're all on the same page. For example, on the online classes are effective assignment, where we had you write the affirmative case, I know I wrote for a lot of the students in my class, it would have been helpful in the resolution analysis if you were to have defined what an online class is. Do you mean 100% online? Do you mean a hybrid system? Do you mean college classes, K through 12 classes? From my experience, I can definitely tell you a kindergarten class online is not effective. This is not going well at my house. And so it would be helpful to know what are the parameters of the debate, what are we talking about, so we can clash. Next, you'll present your affirmative issue 1 and affirmative issue 2, the 2 reasons why we should agree with you that the resolution should be supported, before finally introducing your conclusion to wrap up your presentation. A quick 10 to 15 second conclusion, just like in speech 1A again, to finish your speech. All right, after the first affirmative, we then have the negative cross-examination. The negative debater gets to ask 1 minute worth of questions to the affirmative debater. Again, for spring 2020, I'm not 100% sure if we're going to be having cross-examination. We probably will not at least do it for the first round of debates, but maybe for the second one, if we can figure out how cross-examination can work. When you get to ask questions in an academic debate, there's 3 types of questions you can ask. The first and weakest type of question is a clarification question. A clarification question basically asks the debater to repeat something or to put something in other words because you didn't quite understand it. And all this really does is give your opponent more time to talk about their arguments. So while necessary if something was confusing or you didn't understand it, because then it'd be really hard to refute it, ideally try to get away from clarification questions. Instead, the 2 types we'd like you to ask are attacking questions, where you go after one of the claims that your opponent made, put them on the defensive, or especially in this cross-examination, if you're the negative cross-examining the first affirmative speech, you can ask setup questions, because you know what your negative issues are going to be in the debate, but your opponent doesn't. And sometimes you can ask them a question that they will agree to something that you can then use to support your negative positions. In a courtroom and legal debating, these can be objected to. They're often called leading questions, and the attorney can say objection, and the question has to be withdrawn. In academic debate, ask all the leading questions you can think of. Of course, as Professor Staler talked about in judging academic debates, IPDA puts a strong emphasis on courtesy. So as you're asking and answering questions, you want to think about doing so in a courteous way. Okay, following the first affirmative speech and the negative cross-examination comes the first negative speech. And this is the first debate speech where you're going to have to do some impromptu argumentation, because you're going to have 2 main responsibilities: present your negative case that you've prepared ahead of time, but also refute the affirmative case. Now, you're not going to know what the affirmative case is until you hear the first affirmative speech. So this is where doing a lot of research on the topic and preparing ahead of time will prepare you to answer the arguments that the affirmative is going to present. But we want to start by presenting our negative case. That way we know what you're going to argue in this debate. So again, you want to start with an introduction. Think of it like your Speech 1A public speaking introduction, an attention getter, something like that. Then you're going to present, in our class, we're going to call it negative issue 3. And this is one of the reasons why you oppose the resolution, followed by negative issue 4. And here's where it changes. You're now going to need to go back and refute what the affirmative introduced in their first speech. This is what makes it debating as opposed to just 2 speakers persuading us that their side is right. You're actually going to go back and say why you think the affirmative issue debater is wrong. You've been doing great doing this on the affirmative case assignment, on the ethical quandaries, so I'm really excited to see how you're going to refute each other's cases. So you'll start by refuting affirmative issue 1, then refuting affirmative issue 2, and then having a quick conclusion. So as you can see, the first negative speech is a little bit more involved. You're going to both present your negative case that you've prepared and refute the affirmative case that you just heard. Following the first negative speech, then it's the affirmative cross-examination. The affirmative gets to ask 1 minute worth of questions of the negative debater. Same thing like we talked about. You want to try to get away from clarification questions, but if something's confusing, definitely ask a question so you know how to respond to it. Ideally, ask attacking questions, go after some of the claims that the negative debater presented, or set up any responses that you might have that you're ready to present. Again, remember courtesy. All right, then we move into the second affirmative speech. It's kind of like a tennis match, right? Affirmative, negative, affirmative, negative. And so in the second affirmative speech, you now only have 2 minutes, right? So it's now into the rebuttals. You're no longer introducing any new arguments. You're simply refuting and rebuilding. And so you also have 2 responsibilities in the second affirmative speech. Your first is to refute the negative case. And so you're going to go and say, my opponent on negative issue 3 said this, but I say because, therefore, and try to convince your judge and your audience that your side is right. Next, you're going to refute negative issue 4. Again, on negative issue 4, my opponent said this, but I say because, therefore. Then you're going to go back and try to rebuild your affirmative case. So remember, you presented your 2 affirmative issues in the first affirmative speech. The negative debater just got up and refuted those. Now your job is to try to rebuild them. Why are those two affirmative issues still correct despite what the negative debater just said? And so you're going to go and rebuild affirmative issue 1, rebuild affirmative issue 2, and then we'll be done with the second affirmative speech. Again, like a tennis match, we're now going to jump back over to the negative side. The second negative will have 2 minutes. This is the final negative speech in the debate. And again, you're going to have 2 responsibilities. First, to rebuild your negative case. Remember, you presented your negative issue 3 and negative issue 4 and your first negative. The affirmative debater just got up and refuted those. Now it's your chance to rebuild them. So you're going to start by rebuilding negative issue 3. Why is negative issue 3 still correct despite what the affirmative debater just said? Rebuild negative issue 4. Why is that issue still correct despite what the affirmative debater said? And now here's your last chance to once again refute the affirmative case. So refute affirmative issue 1, refute affirmative issue 2. All right, now we're going to get into the final speech, the third affirmative speech. We follow in academic debate kind of the legal model where the prosecution starts, the defense goes, and then the prosecution closes the trial. We do the same thing where the affirmative opens, negative, affirmative, negative, and the affirmative gets one last chance to try to persuade the judge. You're going to follow the same format. You're going to, again, refute the negative issues and then rebuild your affirmative issues. And that's the debate. So in the next video, we're going to show you what that looks like if we had an actual resolution. But hopefully that clarifies sort of what the debate is going to look like for our class. Again, it's going to start with an affirmative constructive for 4 minutes. We'll then have a cross-examination for 1 minute, or we might skip that this semester. We'll then do a first negative for 4 minutes, a cross-examination for 1 minute, an affirmative rebuttal for 2 minutes, a negative rebuttal for 2 minutes, and a final affirmative rebuttal for 2 minutes.